The ticker symbol SPCX blinks across the massive electronic billboards of Times Square on June 12, 2026. In a single historic trading day, Space Exploration Technologies Corporation launches the largest initial public offering the global financial system has ever seen. The numbers are staggering, almost incomprehensible to the human mind. The offering opens at a firm price of $135 per share, immediately injecting $75 billion of fresh liquidity into a mission designed to colonize the red sands of Mars. Within hours, a frenzy of retail and institutional buying forces the stock to skyrocket, shattering all records and pushing the market capitalization of SpaceX well past the $2 trillion threshold. On paper, this is the absolute zenith of human ambition. Elon Musk, controlling 42% of the equity and a commanding 82% of the voting power, watches his personal net worth explode past the $1 trillion mark, making him the first official dollar trillionaire in human history. He has conquered the sky, rewritten the laws of Wall Street, and established a financial empire that positions him nearly 4 times wealthier than his closest global competitor. He is, by every metric of modern society, the most powerful private citizen on the surface of the planet Earth. But just now, as the champagne corks pop in New York and the world gasps at a net worth tracker that reads 12 figures, a very different kind of document is being processed far away from the cameras. While the public celebrates the monetization of the cosmos, the inner sanctuary of the newly crowned trillionaire is experiencing a silent, devastating structural collapse. The money is infinite, but the space beside him is entirely empty. Behind the glass windows of a hyper-minimalist, $50,000 prefab box house sitting in the dusty expanse of Boca Chica, Texas, there are no congratulations. There is no partner to share the weight of a $2 trillion victory. The flashing notifications on his phone are a chaotic mix of skyrocketing stock charts and urgent cold dispatches from family court attorneys. The supreme architect of the future has successfully built a system to land reusable rockets on autonomous drone ships, yet he sits in the dim light of a computer monitor, unable to engineer a single lasting human connection. This is the ultimate curiosity gap of the modern era. How does a man capable of micromanaging the trajectory of an interplanetary starship fail so fundamentally to manage the trajectory of a basic human marriage? Why does every woman who enters his orbit eventually choose to flee his gravity, preferring the quiet stability of normal life over the multi-billion-dollar simulation of the Musk empire? The world watches the rockets rise, but tonight we pull back the steel curtain to examine the wreckage left on the launchpad of his private life. The personal life of Elon Musk is not a conventional narrative of romance and heartbreak. It is a high-stakes geopolitical minefield where private affection is constantly weaponized by the sheer scale of his public mission. Right now, in this volatile post-IPO landscape of mid-2026, his domestic environment is a complex web of overlapping relationships, legal non-disclosure agreements, and custody disputes that threaten to bleed directly into the corporate governance of his companies. To look at the roster of his personal life is to look at a masterclass in emotional volatility. There is Justine Wilson, the brilliant sci-fi author and the mother of his first 5 surviving children, who walked away with a public warning about what happens when a spouse tries to turn a marriage into a corporate acquisition. There is Tallulah Riley, the British actress with a mind for physics, who Musk married, divorced, remarried, and divorced yet again in a frantic loop of domestic trial and error. Then came Grimes, the avant-garde cyber-pop musician who attempted to navigate his transhumanist ideals, only to find herself trapped in an agonizing custody war over 3 children with names that read like lines of software code. And silently operating in the background is Siobhan Zilis, the elite neural tech executive and mother to 3 more of his children, blurring the lines between corporate hierarchy and genetic legacy. This specific moment is uniquely explosive because his personal life is no longer just a tabloid distraction. It is a direct risk factor for a $2 trillion market cap. With SpaceX now operating as a publicly traded entity under the intense scrutiny of NASDAQ regulators, every domestic outburst, Every late-night emotional post on X and every bitter custody filing has the power to instantly erase tens of billions of dollars in investor wealth. The single-stage release of insider stock and the complex web of retail investor allocations mean that millions of everyday retirement portfolios are now directly exposed to the psychological stability of a single man. The core conflict of the Musk marriage minefield is a brutal, irreconcilable struggle between his cosmic mission and his basic humanity. Elon operates under the unyielding conviction that his life belongs entirely to the preservation of human consciousness across the stars. He views his companies not as businesses, but as holy crusades against the inevitable extinction of our species. When a man believes he is carrying the weight of the entire human future on his shoulders, a wife's request for a quiet weekend or an emotional conversation is not just an inconvenience. It is interpreted by his brain as an existential threat to the mission. You cannot negotiate a healthy, egalitarian marriage when one partner genuinely believes that taking an afternoon off could delay the evacuation of Earth. The path to a trillion-dollar fortune is littered with the remnants of domestic peace. And to understand why the current status quo is so fractured, one must look at the deeply ingrained pattern of chaos that has defined Musk's relationships from the very beginning. This is a cycle that does not change with the addition of billions. It only amplifies. It began in the early days of Zip2 and PayPal, when Elon was still a hungry, unproven entrepreneur. When he married Justine Wilson, the foundation was laid not on mutual vulnerability, but on an explicit power dynamic. On the very day of their wedding, while dancing at their reception, Elon looked into his new bride's eyes and delivered a chilling line that would define the rest of her life. "I am the alpha in this relationship." This was not a joke, it was an operating directive. As his wealth grew with the early success of Tesla, the marriage transformed into a corporate structure where Justine felt less like a wife and more like an employee whose performance metrics were constantly being evaluated. Elon micromanaged everything from the shade of her hair to the frequency of her presence at corporate dinners, demanding that she abandon her own literary ambitions to become a pristine, blonde accessory to his rising tech empire. When she suffered deep emotional trauma after the tragic sudden infant death of their firstborn son, Nevada, Elon's response was not to mourn invulnerability, but to classify her grief as an emotional inefficiency, telling her to fix it or suppress it so they could move on to the next phase of production. This work addiction is a terminal disease for domestic tranquility. Elon's brain does not process leisure time. It views it as a system error. During the agonizing production hell eras of the Tesla Model 3, or the early explosive failures of the Falcon 1 rockets, the concept of a home life was completely deleted from his schedule. He demands that his partners adapt to a life where dinners are canceled at a moment's notice, where the husband sleeps on a factory floor for 3 weeks straight, and where every personal conversation is interrupted by an endless stream of engineering crises. When Justine finally reached her breaking point and issued an ultimatum demanding a return to true intimacy, Musk did not negotiate. He gave her 24 hours to accept the terms of his emotional absence, and when she couldn't, he filed for divorce the very next morning. The pattern was set. Tallulah Riley would later discover the exact same reality, finding herself caught in a dizzying cycle of trying to provide a stable emotional anchor for a man who treats stability as a form of stagnation. The explosion we are witnessing in his personal life today was not a surprise. It is the predictable, inevitable output of an algorithm that treats human emotion as a variable that must be optimized out of existence. Every catastrophic failure has a definitive turning point, a single moment where the stress on the metal becomes too great and the rocket hull finally ruptures. For Elon Musk's modern relationship matrix, that breaking point arrived not with a quiet conversation behind closed doors, but with a series of high-profile legal filings and digital declarations that permanently shattered the illusion of his controlled family structure. The moment the public truly understood that the internal architecture of his personal life had broken beyond repair was when the custody papers regarding his children with Grimes were unsealed in a family court in Texas. For years, the public had viewed their relationship as a quirky, futuristic romance between two eccentric geniuses who operated above the rules of conventional society. They lived in separate houses, spoke of a fluid, non-traditional partnership, and co-parented children named after mathematical variables. But the reality of the split was ancient, bitter, and cold. The slow-moving tragedy of the legal battle revealed that behind the cyberpop aesthetics lay a brutal struggle for control. When Grimes packed her bags and attempted to establish a life of independence for her children in California, away from the suffocating presence of the Starbase launch facilities, Musk did not react like a modern, progressive co-parent. He reacted like a corporate entity facing an unauthorized spin-off. He utilized his security teams, his private aviation tracking, and his vast legal machinery to establish a preemptive custody suit in Texas, a state with strict caps on child support and a legal bias toward his established corporate domicile. The dramatic pacing of this split played out in excruciating slow motion in the public eye. Imagine the profound silence that follows after the digital noise fades. The public "I do" of their shared futuristic vision quickly devolved into a bitter "I don't." There is a terrifying quiet in an empty mansion when the realization sets in that all the money in the world cannot buy the voluntary presence of the person you love. The turning point was the realization that Elon could not tolerate an independent variable in his domestic equation. If a partner could not be fully integrated into his ecosystem, if they demanded an autonomous existence outside the borders of his corporate campuses, they had to be treated as an adversary in a high-stakes litigation framework. When a trillionaire experiences a domestic meltdown, the shockwaves do not remain confined to the living room. They ripple instantly through the global digital consciousness and shake the foundations of the stock market. The moment the details of his custody battles and personal isolation became public, the platform formerly known as Twitter, now X, erupted into a chaotic media circus. For weeks, the trending topics were a battleground between die-hard Musk loyalists and fierce critics. Memes comparing his vast cosmic wealth with his empty living spaces flooded the internet, raising a deeply uncomfortable question that resonated with millions of everyday users. What is the point of owning 41% of a $2 trillion rocket company if you cannot find a single person to share a home with? The impact on his corporate image was immediate and severe. In the days following the intense media coverage of his personal disputes, institutional investors on Wall Street began to voice serious concerns about key man risk. The stock of Tesla, already highly volatile, suffered sharp downward corrections as analysts openly questioned whether Elon's increasingly erratic personal life and late-night emotional posts on X were a sign of impending executive burnout. The title of First Lady of Mars, once used casually by the media to describe his partners, became a public joke, a position with a historically high turnover rate that no amount of corporate prestige could justify. The media circus turned his private pain into a multi-platform commodity. Paparazzi drones buzzed over his properties in Texas and California, attempting to catch a glimpse of the lonely tycoon walking the grounds of his tech facilities. Every public appearance was dissected by body language experts. Every regulatory filing was scanned for hidden signs of domestic retaliation. The man who had spent his entire life mastering the public narrative found himself completely at the mercy of a media machine that cared far more about his human failures than his technological triumphs. He had built a world where everything was transparent, only to discover that transparency offers absolutely no protection when your personal life begins to bleed out in public. To truly understand the profound loneliness of Elon Musk, we must move past the legal documents and the stock charts and descend into the dark, complex labyrinth of his personal psychology. Elon Musk is not a victim of circumstance. He is the supreme architect of his own absolute isolation. The fundamental question that haunts his biography is whether he is psychologically capable of experiencing a normal, healthy, egalitarian relationship. The answer, deeply rooted in his traumatic childhood in South Africa, is tragic. Raised under the oppressive shadow of an emotionally volatile and intensely manipulative father, Elon Musk, Elon learned very early that vulnerability is synonymous with danger. In the Musk household, to show weakness was to invite destruction. To survive, Elon's developing brain constructed a massive, impenetrable psychological defense mechanism, a compulsion for absolute, unyielding control over every element of his environment. This trauma-induced software architecture works brilliantly when you are building reusable rockets or manufacturing millions of electric vehicles. These are cold, logical systems that respond perfectly to rigorous optimization and micromanagement. But when you apply that exact same operating system to human romance, it acts as a lethal toxin. A relationship requires the one thing Elon's psychology is programmed to reject: the total surrender of control and the willingness to be vulnerable in the presence of another human being. Because he cannot surrender control, he unconsciously structures his relationships to ensure their eventual failure. He selects brilliant, fiercely independent women because his intellect demands a challenge, but his insecurity ensures that he will immediately begin using his wealth, his prestige, and his contracts to systematically strip away their autonomy. Who gains from this cycle? The corporate empires of Tesla and SpaceX do. When Elon's personal life spirals into chaos, his response is always to plunge deeper into his work, using the pain of his broken relationships to fuel his manic 20-hour workdays on the factory floor. His brilliance is directly sustained by his personal pain. He builds rockets to escape the intolerable silence of an empty home. The absolute collapse of Elon Musk's domestic peace raises a profound, chilling warning about the future of his legacy and the ultimate cost of the great man theory of history. As his wealth reaches heights never before recorded in human civilization, the impact on his 14 children becomes a matter of critical historical concern. What kind of legacy is left behind when a father views his children not as individuals to be loved, but as a demographic mission to protect the light of human consciousness? The intense pressure of growing up under the Método Musk, isolated from the normal rhythms of childhood, enrolled in an experimental tech academy, and viewed as genetic assets for the colonization of a distant planet, presents a terrifying psychological burden. The historical precedents are clear. The children of hyper-obsessive, world-changing titans rarely inherit their parents' genius. Instead, they frequently inherit the deep, unresolved emotional wounds left behind by a parent who prioritized humanity over his own family. This reality exposes the deep, dark side of our cultural obsession with visionary leaders. We have built a society that worships the brilliant disruptor, the eccentric billionaire who breaks the rules to deliver the technology of tomorrow. We excuse their cruelty, we overlook their emotional coldness, and we tolerate their domestic tyranny because they promise to give us electric cars, neural interfaces, and spaceships. But the tragedy of Elon Musk forces us to confront an uncomfortable, paradoxical truth. Can you truly save humanity if you cannot manage to save a single marriage? Is a civilization built on the backs of broken families and absolute personal isolation a civilization worth preserving across the stars? If the path to Mars requires the total eradication of empathy, vulnerability, and domestic peace in the lives of the people who build that future, then the world we are creating might be just as cold, barren, and lifeless as the red planet itself. The camera pulls back slowly from the lonely stretch of highway that cuts through the flat, dusty landscape of Starbase, Texas. In the far distance, the massive silver tower of the Starship launch pad stands like a giant, silent monument to human ambition, illuminated by the cold, stark glare of industrial floodlights. It is a triumph of engineering, a testament to what can be achieved when a human mind refuses to accept the limitations of gravity. But down below that monument, nestled in the shadows of the launch facility, sits the small, unassuming prefab box house. The windows are dark, save for the blue, flickering glow of a single computer monitor inside. There are no crowds here. There are no cheering investors, no standing ovations from Wall Street, and no family gathered around a kitchen table. There is only a single man, sitting quietly in an ergonomic chair, staring at a screen that updates his net worth by millions of dollars every single second. For Elon Musk, the realization of his ultimate dream has arrived with a profound, terrifying quiet. He has won the war for the public markets. He has secured his status as the first trillionaire in human history. He has built a machine that can carry our species to the stars. But as he sits alone in the Texas night, the truth becomes undeniable. The war at home is infinitely harder than the war for Mars. You can calculate the physics of a rocket trajectory. You can optimize the chemical composition of rocket fuel, but you cannot solve the volatile, unpredictable equation of the human heart. The loneliness at the top is not a temporary condition for Elon Musk. It is the permanent climate of his existence. He has conquered the sky, but in doing so, he has stranded himself on an island of his own making. As the screen fades to black and the distant hum of the rocket test stands echoes through the dark, we are left with a final, haunting image of the modern Prometheus, a man who gave fire to the world, but who is condemned to sit forever in the cold, dark void of his own extraordinary success. If this deep dive into the hidden price of genius and the architecture of isolation moved you, hit the like button to support long-form, high-retention documentary journalism. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below with your thoughts on the ultimate cost of a $1 trillion legacy. Is the price of conquering the stars worth losing your home on Earth? Let us know, and we will see you in the next chronicle of the empires that shape our world.